designers, this is Gavin here with Secrets of Longevity.com. If you've had any experience looking into the world of prepping or preparedness, you'll understand that there is a crossover with some of the things I've already talked about on this channel, known as survival skills. I haven't really gone that far into that topic, but anything to do with like wildcrafting and foraging wild foods, anything that has to do with being able to live ongoingly in the wild would be considered a survival skill, of course. Even just the fundamental words do mean very broad things, and there's a lot of overlap between those two ideas. But I see these as separate things in terms of the communities that promote and teach some of these things. And I think there's a lot we can learn from both camps, and we can also see where they blend, but also see where they differ, and why, in my opinion, we should focus on survival skills and not as much on preparedness. Survival skills in and of themselves will give you preparedness, but if we look at the sort of long-term people who have been doing preparedness type things, they often get into a mindset of preparing for a specific type of almost like apocalyptic event. A lot of times it's very easy to simply do some research on the probability of some of these things happening, like, meteor strikes on the earth, or nuclear attack on your country within proximity of where you live, nuclear meltdown within proximity of where you live, obviously things like economic collapse and cities revolting and pillaging farmland, or obviously any homes that are in your area, so you want to be outside of those kinds of areas. There's tips from all those things, but when you get really locked into one idea of a thing that you want to prepare for, and one I saw, or two others that are a little more obscure, is the volcano or several volcanoes going off in Yellowstone Park, National Park, and that becoming really wiping out a lot of crops and things and causing food famine, but also the gases and fumes from that being very toxic and drifting into New York City and all the cities on the East Coast. Another one was just an all-out epidemic of a flu variety. And people that prepare for these things, they prepare in really ridiculously specific ways. So I think preparedness is great. I think it's wise to always have a basic level of preparedness going on. Everyone does in subtle ways, and the government of many countries actually recommend people do a certain amount, like just because of natural disasters and things. I remember a few years ago here in Ontario, and what happened in Quebec as well, we had an ice storm which knocked out power lines, because there was also snow involved. It made it impossible for people to get out and get to safer areas. People died in their homes because they didn't have enough water stored up. They didn't have the ability to contact emergency services, or the emergency services couldn't get to them, or their power ran something that was essential to them living because they were elderly, and that caused something to break down. And there was a lot of problems that came as a result of this. And while it never hit us where I live hard, I do recall my dad having little things he had done, like when it was starting to hit, he filled the bathtub up with water right away in case the water went off. We'd have a supply of water on hand. He also had water jugs in the basement at that time, I believe. He had a few other things in the basement ready to go, and we of course had tons of camping stock because I grew up camping. Those could all be used in emergency type situations. That aside, what I'm trying to explain here is that yes, preparedness is good. Preparedness for one specific thing is not necessarily the ideal situation. Yes, for any scenario you're going to be storing up food and things like that, and that's going to be great. But the more specific you get, the more you miss out on the other potential things, and also you're missing out just in the general benefits of a more general approach. So when we look at survival skills, we can really think of it in terms of being a very general approach. You're learning to identify, consume, and utilize wild foods and herbs. You might decide to take up some hunting skills, and also the ability to clean and prepare the items that are associated with animals, so the bones or hide, and prepare those in certain ways. You might learn skills in terms of utilizing your environment as well as plants for constructing a place to live in. So all of these are very general things that can be applied to a lot of the preparedness situations, but they also have extremely good health benefits. You're eating wild foods. You're out in nature. You're not, storing up very conventional foods, even lower quality than conventional foods because they're very dehydrated. They're often have preservatives added to them in some cases. You're storing them in these big plastic bins. And really, you see these people doing this, and it's just like, why not, first of all, store food that's actually healthy? Seems to me that would be the first on the level of what can we get the most out of our devotion to this thing. Then, except in the few cases where the outdoors becomes inhospitable, if you have the ability to go outside and collect these wild foods, you supplement that to the stored food. You maybe store some staples. You store wild rice, quinoa, various grains and things in abundance so that you have that as a last resort. And you only use from that what you need from the lack of what you can get outside in the wild. So that's why I like the idea of emphasizing survival skills in a general outdoor type scenario. The whole preparedness culture seems to be heavily influenced and almost like indoctrinated by this mass-produced type of mentality that, get all this stuff from Walmart, store it up in your basement for Doomsday. And it just does not quite add up. We're heading towards this place as humanity where we're hoping to have greater awareness in these things we're doing. And if you're like me, have an interest in supporting and helping things grow in our community, in the greater world, that represent more conscious businesses, more conscious practices, if we're talking about people that supply things. So trying to rely on this sort of mass-produced, fabricated plastic world of all these things just does not make sense. A similar scenario would be the people that are super afraid of some kind of epidemic. They prepare in the most absurd way of collecting all these, once again, plastic sheets and things to put over themselves, to tape up over their windows in this crisis, flu epidemic. They're obviously going to be the type of person that's going to getting flu shots every year. They're most likely going to be sanitizing every single counter, every surface of their skin and body. They're going to be sanitizing anyone that comes through their door. They might have kids they're sanitizing. And what happens if a kid grows up almost from birth in a completely sterile environment? Their immune system's going to crash over time because they're killing off all the good bacteria that they come into contact with, as well as some of the bad bacteria that helps their immune system develop and become a strong resistance to the other bugs that are out there that we haven't encountered yet that might be responsible for a flu epidemic. And so by being paranoid and preparing for an epidemic, in and of itself, that behavior permits the possibility for an epidemic hitting you harder than other people, or at least your family or the kids that grew up in this sterile environment. So there's a lot of different possibilities, there's a lot of different things people do. I just want to illustrate that point with that example to really emphasize that the naturalistic or holistic or being at one with the outdoors type of worldview, which would be classified as survival skills, which are very general, they're not focusing on one possible outcome, is a lot healthier overall, is going to be better for a number of possibilities of what could happen in the world. If something were to ever happen that was on a large scale drastic, but even smaller scale things that happen, there's, as I'm making this video, there's been floods in Colorado. If you're ever in a natural disaster situation, survival skills are going to be better than most things you store up in your basement, whether they're tools or other things. Of course, there's always going to be very practical things that you can have on hand. Just be discerning as to what those are, and I think it's best to avoid the super paranoid ideas that are often portrayed in some of these communities, like what I've mentioned. So let me know what you think of this video in the comments below. Like, favorite, and share this video if you feel so inclined. And I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.